everybody, welcome to the for sale video for Amy, the 1969 164. Before we get to that, I want to remind you, I launched a fundraiser to give back to the Volvo community through the nonprofit organization Slow Rolling, as well as to fund my road trip for the Nationals meet in about 2 weeks. The link for that fundraiser is down below, and in the first 24 hours that we launched, we're already 12% funded. Thank you. Check it out, share it with your friends, and support us if you can. Thanks. Hello everybody, David here, and this video is the for sale video for this 1969 Volvo 164. It is California white, I believe is the color. It has got a 3-liter engine and a 3-speed automatic transmission. It's a very cool, luxurious, and fun classic car. In this video, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story of the car. We'll do an overview. I'll show you around the vehicle, check that everything works, and you can see that the lights are working right now since I've got the parking lamps turned on. And I will go over its ability to drive under its own power, or at least move under its own power, and all the little quirks, features, and the condition. I'm going to be a little over the top with just how transparent this is going to be, because I want this to be a good faith sale attempt for a really sweet car that's looking for her forever home. This car started out its life in California, and it lived there up until March of this year, when I transported it here to New Mexico for some work. Now, in full honesty, I bought it as a parts car for another 164 that I was restoring, and I took the pieces that I couldn't find anywhere else, like the dashboard, the seats, the gauge cluster, and the front bumper, but otherwise she is a complete, able to move under her own power car. The odometer, when I pulled it out, said 317,000 miles, which is actually quite impressive, but for an old Volvo, that's par for the course. And now the odometer that's in there works, it's just reading 100,000 miles fewer. So some things to note like that, we'll go over in the entire thing. The car is named Amy because of, rumor has it, its first owner. I believe from the title that I got from her, it did have that name. It lived under a tree, unfortunately, which is where I got some rust. But for the rest of it, it is a California car, not Central Coast, but right up San Luis Obispo County. So it's kind of between Santa Barbara County and whatever's north of that, Central Coast. So that didn't really rust it quickly, but it did have a collection of leaves and debris under a tree, and the occasional rains would come in and just cause a little bit of rust on the vehicle. But for the most part, underneath she's solid, and as it was intended as a parts car, I don't have the heart to send this off to the crusher or just donate it to a place that will crush it later. So what I'd like to do is see this car get restored as it deserves, and I was so impressed with how easy it was to get the thing running and driving, and how complete it was, and the care that somebody else had taken up until it was parked in about 2003, that I'm really impressed with this car, and I think she really deserves another chance at life, whether it's a resto mod or a faithful, full, original restoration. There's not a lot of 164s available, and being an early chassis number, first year model, I think that makes it a little more special. And because of who I am and just the nature of my work as a Volvo restorer, I've been attempting to keep all of the hardware original for the places that it was removed. And we'll just go over some of the details and everything like that. I'm going to show you a video of how the car condition is inside and out, and that is a full interior is removed, all the metal is exposed, and you can see with the dashboard out, with all the seats out and the door panels off, the full shape of the car and its condition. And then you can just see how little true rust there is, and how small spots here and there do need to be repaired, like around the windscreen. But for the most part, she's so worth saving. Give me 60 seconds, allow me to tell you why this car is worth saving, and that would be because there's no real rust outside of the window frame, okay? I am amazed by how much of the interior is basically not penetrated with rust. The corners, yeah, this part's kind of rough, but nothing's penetrated. Same thing over here, it looks pretty, but the typical spots, like down in the corners, inside the rocker panels, boom, 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 no rust. It's just amazing. Inside the doors is door. Boom, no rust. And the thing that surprised me even the most, and that's because, well, you can see the size of the hole In the back there, this thing has perfect wheel arches. Zero rust. Amy is worth saving. Yes. I really hope she gets a good home. Thanks. I'd like to take a moment to show you the rust repair, or I guess rust reformer, that I have put on around the circumference of the windshield before I put the glass back on. This isn't going to have a windshield that's roped in because of the repairs that will be necessary in the beginning of whatever restoration this car begins to undertake, hopefully under new ownership. And it could be a metal repair or it could just be a fiberglass repair. But if you look around, there was never any rust down there in the hole, and it really just went at the surface level and started eating itself up there. This passageway that you're looking at is actually the cowl that goes down here and then down the sides of each of the footwells. Now, the rust around here was all sprayed with OSFO, prepares rusted surfaces for painting, and stops rust. It causes iron oxide to chemically change to iron phosphate, an inert hard substance that turns metal black. OSFO also grows a layer of zinc phosphate to further protect the treated metal from rust and corrosion. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I do want to show you in detail before the windshield gets put back in so you have an idea of exactly what this car needs repair-wise. And then there's a little bit of the sealer left here and back to rust up there. So it's really this section that will need rust repair on both corners, a little bit on the top here, in the middle up top, a little bit up there, a spot there, and again in the corner. From here, this wiper all the way to the other wiper, it's pretty solid. Up this corner to the center of the car, pretty solid. And then that section there is pretty solid as well. So that's it for rust stuff. Now I'll put the windshield on. The body is in pretty okay shape. It doesn't look like there's any bad rusting on the corners down the bottom like you'll see on some cars from the Midwest or the East Coast. There's a little bit of body damage here and there, some of the dents and dings. Old Volvo paint from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's actually quite good at showing some shine through it. And I didn't put any elbow grease into this paint, but you can still see, just from a hand wash, a lot of shine came out. Now, the windows are a little rusty at the elevator channel, which is the part that connects to the winding mechanism. And that, unfortunately, has limited their mobility, but it does still technically roll up and down. The mechanism is fully intact. It's just that elevator channel sits right at the bottom of the glass. The glass tucks into it. Rainwater gets in through these seals, which are pretty dried out. And unfortunately, that's the first thing that rusts. But the inside of the doors themselves are pretty good, and you'll see that a little bit later. Unfortunately, somebody in these door panels, these aren't Amy's original door panels, but they put speakers on there, which is a big no-no. But thankfully, the metal underneath is still virgin door skin and has no... That's a weird phrase. I should probably not use that again. It's got no molestation, another weird one, to the metal there. So when you do go in, there's not going to be much drama behind these panels. Everything is there. Okay, I can go ahead and turn the lights off. And the interior, the car did have air conditioning, and I put the AC ducting and everything back in. It's not completely all the way up because there's a few spots where the plastic isn't attached or broken here and there. The dashboard is pretty cracked up top, but it is complete. You've got your cluster, all your instruments there, and the wood grain vinyl, and the 3-speed column-mounted shifter with the steering pad and the horn, and we'll go over the electrics. This panel here for the air conditioning is the switches, and behind it, this is the thermostatic controlled sensor for triggering the air conditioning. And that unit is a capillary tube that goes inside of here toward the evaporator. Behind the switch panel is another panel cover, and this is where the wiring goes through for these guys, which are safely secured on the back of that. And behind the plastic cover are the fuses. I don't know if you'd call it a glove box, but it's a little shelf there, and the manual cars would have the shifter right here, but this one has an armrest, which I understand is a pretty rare option. Some people online made a big deal out of it when they first saw this car in a video. As far as carpeting goes, this car has aftermarket rugs, but I put the original rugs back in wherever applicable. You can see some of the high wear spots there and down there. This is just a regular household rug, but underneath it is the other rug, which is the original Volvo, and underneath that is the sound deadening, and underneath that is just the floor of the car. Volvo did a pretty good job rust-proofing these cars on the floors. As far as wiring goes, everything in this car has original wiring, the same way that I kind of put the original hardware back. There's one wire that I had to add, and that is because the starter trigger wire was giving me an open circuit for whatever reason. And that one's just right here. This guy connected to the back of the ignition switch, where I have one red wire that now runs directly to the starter. Under the hood, you will see that, but it's essentially just this guy on its own to the same connection where that red wire goes. So nothing scary about it, just one break in the wiring, and I'm not sure why. I think it's a relay issue because that should go to one of the relays. And they do get pretty brittle over time. This car does have a steering wheel lock right there, which is pretty cool for 1969. It's got hazard switch here. Blinks kind of fast, and I think that's because this bulb isn't working, but there's the indicator there, and the hazards up front. Let's go look at the ones in the rear. It's hard to tell, but both of them are blinking. Heater controls are connected. There is no ashtray, there is no radio, but the handle is in place. The evaporator is in there. The hoses for it are not connected to anything, but they are attached to it still. They're good templates for recreating the hoses. Old dry rubber, that's just probably best if you do want to have the working air conditioning system that you go ahead and redo those hoses. You can see a zip tie in there that's holding one of the heater duct hoses in place for the defroster, and that is just because there's a split in the hose, and that's a pretty quick way to get it to stay back up onto these vents here. As far as the rear view mirror, there is the piece for it that attaches the rear view mirror and the rear view mirror itself. They are in the parts pile that will be included in the trunk of this vehicle, and we can go over that right now. In addition to everything that's inside the car, I'd like to talk about what I'll be putting in the trunk in terms of parts that will be included with the vehicle. We've got the carpet. This is just a custom cut somebody made, but you see how it's sort of shaped around the bowl where the fuel tank goes. Underneath that is the cover here with the screws. And from there, it's deformed, but it's a good template. There's a lot of stuff that's good templates. The headliner's here, and the two important things, while the vinyl itself is brittle and broken in many places, we have the bows and the mirror mount here. So both included. There's the hole for the light, the dome light, so it's all there, ready to be cut out. This is the rubber mat that normally lived under this and on top of that, and it's in really dried out shape, but also a template, so I'll include that. These are extra door seals. The car's complete with its door seals currently, but these are the ones that go inside the car around the frame. And this is the template that I made for the center console, including the spare center console from a car with a manual shifter, so it actually has the hole cut out in the center, but it's otherwise the same shape. So if you wanted to redo the carpet, since you can't buy these carpets new for this model, then it's a good template as well, and that one gets pretty close too. Spare carpet pieces here. This is the backing to some of those smaller pieces, but it could also be helpful for making templates since it's kept its shape. Just a couple of extra pieces of carpet, but like I said, the car is complete with carpeting right now, as you see in the other parts of the video. And then this box of spares has some important stuff as well. A spare antenna, the one that's on there now, is broken, and then there's the logos. I don't want to put these on because I'm worried that this one has broken tabs and I don't want it to fall off, and I don't want to use glue right now, so there's that. And then the tabs on this one are complete, but they are looking kind of thin, so I don't want to install it and risk breaking those tabs. There might be a better solution, just put it in and put some glue or something, but it's not something I wanted to do. I'd rather just leave these out here, especially if you want to clean them or have them repaired. This is the insulation for the seat, the back seat. I had to remove these, just check if there's any rust on those shock mounts, and like we saw, there was 0, which is impressive. The rear view mirror is in here underneath the sound deadening. The lens has come out from the housing, but I think the housing is important because you can use the metal arm on it to get replacement plastic pieces and lenses. So it's good to have that. This is an extra choke cable. That's the windshield gasket, the old one. So there's a couple of miscellaneous bits of plastic that have come off of here and there, and I just thought it'd be important to include those for whatever reason. So a lot of it's available new through VP Auto Parts, so it's not a big deal. This firewall insulation is not really important because it's old technology, just using a lot of glue, and it's really heavy, but the pieces are there if you need a template. And here is the steering coupler. It has been opened, but it's still new. Now you'll notice in here there's no sun visors. There aren't any. Lots of old Volvos tend to have sun visors broken or missing, and some of them just aren't available. I put the grab handles back in and the insulating foam back in, but there is no headliner installed. It is in the trunk right now because the vinyl is in pretty rough shape. The seats are blue. They are not the original faded tan leather, which I've actually put into the green car, but I have put these back in. They don't really have any rips in them, but they are pretty sun-beaten on the top half here at the headrest. There's the rear panel, everything cleaned up nicely on these doors. The underside of the doors, pretty clear. There's no rust there, thankfully. Water was able to drain out the bottoms. I love these handles too. Okay, so in the back here, the back seat, the seatbelts are complete, and check this out. One of my favorite details, March 1969. Here on the rear shelf, there's a couple layers of shelf padding. I think there's 2 layers, and then the paperboard underneath. There's no speaker in the middle, but even if there were, it wouldn't be in good shape. For the rug here, you see under the main rug is the original Volvo rug, wherever applicable. And under there, we go back to the sound deadening underneath. The seatbelts do work, the reels work. Pretty dusty, and some of the fraying over the years has made them harder to reel back in, but they're there and still intact. I go for new seatbelts wherever possible. And onto the trunk. Here in the trunk, with everything removed, is a good view of the gas tank, the fuel filler neck with the elbow that it makes, and the wheel wells, or as we affectionately call them, butt cheeks. A little bit of rust. This is kind of the usual spots here underneath the taillight, down there in the corner, and the wheel well itself seemed to be spared for the most part. The fuel tank didn't have any water drain, so it got a little bit of rust, mostly surface rust. It didn't penetrate anything, because one of the things that I did when I first bought the car was drain the gas tank, and the gas came out greenish, but there was no rust coloration in it. It just looked like a kind of green, bluish color almost. It was really interesting. Perhaps it was before ethanol, because the car was parked in 2003. But what I do typically is I will remove 2 screws from the fuel tank here to act as a drain hole in case there's any more water that decides to get in here. But I went over it with a wire brush, removed all the loose scale, and then sprayed it over. It's still the original Volvo tank. The sending unit works. It's just about a quarter tank right now. And down here is the other butt cheek, also sprayed with some of the Stop Rust paint from Rust-Oleum, and I didn't go to so much effort to cover up any of these spots here, but this is really just to help kind of clean things up and get it to at least not continue rusting, as we've done earlier with the rest of the car. And here's the trunk now with the gas tank cover, the kind of fiber paperboard cover installed, and now the remnants of the rubber floor mat installed. And here is the trunk carpet installed. Do note that there is a wooden cover here, and this is a little delaminated in some of the layers of the wood, but it is there and it takes up the gap nicely. It could serve as a good template to recreate. There's a metal tab here that holds it up in place. Do note that this wire here is for the light that normally lived right there, and the switch is broken on it, the contact, so it wouldn't really work either way, but it's going to be included in the spare parts box. And a very important thing that I forgot to mention is that I do have the original front window trim, and this is a very thin aluminum trim, I think, not stainless, but it has the center junction still attached to it, and that will also be in the trunk. Here's some of the details of the area surrounding the trunk. Everything cleaned up pretty nicely. It does look like this is a little dimpled here in the area, but it's difficult to tell. There's no rust on the back shelf here, which is an important thing to note. Typically, rust will form on the underside of the lid itself. It looks okay back there. There is some rust also up here on the front. Penetrated in a few spots, and a little bit over here as well. But the backside, ironically, has 0. It does hold itself up. The trim is all complete there. It looks like a little bit of body work repairing this corner, and some rippling here in the door. I can see it more through the camera than I can with my naked eye. Pretty clear underneath. It looks like this also had a respray at some point of some kind. I don't know exactly what was repainted, but you can see here this spot has been touched up. These look like 2 scratches that ran along the side of the car were touched up. There's a lot of waves in that little door, as we discussed a moment ago. Now, the duct tape on this wheel is to hold the tread back because it was separating. And you know what? It's been holding for months and months, so I'm quite pleased with that. It's enough to get it on and off the trailer. I haven't taken this car on the open road, and I don't think I will, but I will demonstrate for you shortly that she definitely moves under her own power. This bumper, as I mentioned, is not original to the car, but I made sure that the connections here and here do work before putting it back on. So do note that the damage to the bumper, whatever exists on it, is not reflective of the story of this car. The front end seems to be without large injury, which is surprising for old Volvos. Why don't we go ahead and pop the hood, and we can hear the engine running. Check the exhaust, see what kind of smoke comes out, if any. There shouldn't be much, but I will say this. She is jetted for sea level, so up here at about 5,200 feet, she is running a little rich, so it doesn't really need the choke to get going, and the transmission, it leaks, and it moves, but definitely could use a service. This is not a turnkey car, but it is a turnkey project car. I will note this side of the air ducting for the AC unit is actually being held up on this portion by the hood release cable. So just a note, don't yank on the cable too much so that you don't damage the plastic. You can easily grab the back side of the cable from underneath, and that gives you the leverage to pull on it. 3.0, inline 6, and she's complete. I mean, even the AC compressor is in place. These old York styles are hard to find. Here is the red wire that I added temporarily through the firewall grommet there, so I didn't make any extra holes or run it out the side or anything like that. That is there to trigger the starter, and she still runs on the points and condenser. I have not replaced anything ignition-wise. I've replaced the heater hoses that I had to remove when I was taking out the interior and putting the interior with the heater box back in. The AC receiver dryer is there, but you'll see that the line for it is plugged off, as well as the line here on the compressor. The condenser is still in place in the front of the car. I don't know what condition it's in, but I can say that when I remove those lines to remove the evaporator unit from inside the car, they hissed a little bit, and I thought I had R12 in it, but it could have just been elevation change. But that tells me that the system was pretty closed and had some pressure. Not pressure, but had a good seal on it. Let's call it that. The radiator's in rough shape, but it doesn't leak, so I would recommend recoring that, of course, as part of the restoration. But this B30 engine, she's pretty great. I mean, alternators charges. This is the voltage regulator here. There's a duct that is missing here for the carburetor intake, but the filter's in place, and like I said, it's enough to get you started. There's some wiring here that is for the air conditioning unit, and that's all disconnected, so there's no power going in or out of this relay, so you don't need to really worry about that. This is the line for the evaporator coming from the bottom, and the other hose for the evaporator comes right there at that grommet above the heater hoses. She's got power brakes, power steering, and those seem to work. This battery is undersized for this car, but it is enough to get it started. And what else? When I first got the car, I was impressed that the cooling system drained beautiful green coolant out of it. A few calcium rocks at the top of the thermostat, but once I cleared that, everything seemed to flow pretty nicely. I had to trim only a little bit of this hose here that was starting to crack and leak and not hold pressure, but that's been great. Everything else is kind of original. So once again, nicely done, Volvo. Very impressed with the build quality. The coil doesn't look great, of course, but it's enough to get it going, and the resistor does get pretty warm as it's doing its job. This light here works. There it is. Sometimes you gotta wiggle those contacts, which I think is really great. The lever is still in place, and when the hood shuts, it pushes on that very slightly up against here, so that it shuts itself off. A cool little feature, very luxurious of these cars. All right, let's give it a crank, and you can hear her run. It has an original Volvo key, which I think is really cool. My other 164 did not come with that. The ring gear on the back of the engine seems to have a flat spot, so every once in a while when trying to start it, the starter will just spin. And that, at the end of it spinning, it always seems to shift itself enough to get the engine started, but, you know, something to keep in mind as you get into it, that once in a while the crank will just come up against a flat spot on the ring gear. Refuses to quit, so let's give her a good home, and I'll put the link down below for the for sale ad. And here with the key on, we can just one more time check the instruments. You can see the fuel gauge works there, reading just about 1/8 of a tank, and we got just over the cold mark on the temperature. Odometer is turning, and it's sticky up there at the top, but it does all kind of work. It's a really good platform for somebody who just wants a project, wants something fun to work on, and has liked Volvo for a long time, especially the weird, quirky ones, like this inline-six B30 engine. Yes, this tire was flat and I could feel it. Okay, so thanks very much for watching, and I appreciate your support. And if you know the journey of these cars and my channel, thank you. So feel free to ask any questions down below, and let's just see what the community can do to help get this girl into a good home. Gosh, I'm sorry you missed the show, but my phone overheated. That was fun. I left the parking brake on for a little bit, but then as soon as I remembered, well, all heck broke loose.